The Attorney General of Texas launches an investigation into those who lied about the origins of COVID-19 and the COVID vaccine. Democrat politicians complain about the immigration crisis amid President Biden's new proposed legislation to increase immigration. And a young man speaks out to a school board after he was sent home from his middle school back in March for wearing a T-shirt that says that there are two genders, male and female. This is the noteworthy news that you need to know for today, Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023. But first, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below and also follow me at Julie R. Hartman on Instagram and Twitter. First, this Texas Attorney General Paxton is launching an official investigation into three pharmaceutical companies. You may have heard of them, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, in order to see if those companies conducted gain-of-function research, and they are also investigating those companies' claims into the efficacy of their COVID-19 vaccines, specifically what those companies said about transmission. So gain-of-function research, for those who need a reminder, is research in which certain doctors concoct a disease or a virus in order to preemptively create a cure or a vaccine for that virus. This is what happened at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, which was funded by the National Institute of Health, which is an American organization that is funded by taxpayers. The Wuhan Institute of Virology was conducting gain-of-function research. They concocted the COVID virus in order to preemptively create a vaccine for it, and then whoopsie daisies, it just leaked from the Wuhan lab and spread to a global pandemic that has killed millions of people. Now, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, according to this Attorney General, have allegedly lied about conducting gain-of-function research. Now, this allegation should not be surprising to us, given that many members of our government, including Anthony Fauci, lied about U.S. taxpayer money going to the Wuhan lab of virology. He denied for a long time that the National Institute of Health was funding that lab. And indeed, Anthony Fauci, as well as many others, were unwilling to admit until many months into the pandemic that the origin of COVID was even from a lab in the first place. Remember that whole lie that we were sold, that it came from a wet market? And so the Texas Attorney General is trying to straighten this out, because what we have seen is that many individuals, such as Tim Trevin, who is a doctor, are writing in op-eds in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times that some of the COVID mistakes were, quote, honest mistakes. But no, deceit was baked in here in many of these cases. Now, this is an especially complicated situation because the Texas Attorney General is investigating Pfizer for the efficacy of their COVID vaccines and specifically transmission. But just a few months ago in October, one of the senior members of Pfizer actually testified before the European Parliament, saying that at the time of the rollout of the vaccines, Pfizer had no knowledge that it prevented transmissibility. So that seems like pretty certain evidence that it is indeed true that Pfizer lied about the COVID-19 vaccines. There was also that individual who worked for Pfizer who was exposed by James O'Keefe's former organization, Project Veritas. Remember that guy? He was on a date and he talked about how Pfizer was considering doing gain-of-function research. Again, there have been a lot of these public, shocking admissions that may give the Attorney General an up on this lawsuit. He said publicly, if any company illegally took advantage of consumers during this period or compromised people's safety to increase their profits, they will be held responsible. If public health policy was developed on the basis of flawed or misleading research, the public must know. Anthony Fauci, in addition to lying about the National Institute of Health funding the Wuhan Virology Lab, also admitted to the New York Times in recent months that he lied about the efficacy of masks and vaccines in order to increase more Americans to get those vaccines and to wear masks. Also, he lied about the side effects of the vaccine. For instance, many studies have come out saying that it increases the incidence incidence of myocarditis, which is a health affliction, a heart affliction specifically among males. Also, many individuals, including people who work at Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J, suppressed the efficacy of things like hydroxychloroquine, which could provide an alternative to taking the vaccine. We cannot forget many of these lies. They are not just honest mistakes. Again, deceit was at play in many cases here, and it is a great thing that the Texas Attorney General is trying to hold these individuals accountable. Moving on, Democrat politicians are complaining about the migration crisis amid President Biden's new proposal to expand immigration. Yes, many Democrat politicians, mayors, and governors have said in the wake of President Trump's ascendancy in the Republican Party that their cities are, quote, safe spaces for immigrants, safe havens, indeed, in order to combat the supposed bigotry espoused by people like Trump in the Republican Party. Well, those mayors and governors are doing a 180 now that their cities have been overrun by migrants. One of these individuals is the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot. She said publicly a few days ago, quote, "We simply have no more shelters, spaces, or resources." She actually said this in a letter to Texas Governor Greg Abbott. "Though I am sympathetic to the significant challenges that border cities face, this situation is completely untenable." Thank you for admitting what we have known all along. Now, certainly it is true that cities down south that border the border are much more bearing the brunt of the migration crisis. According to the El Paso Times, there are about 10,000 to 12,000 migrants in Juarez, which is just one town, and thousands more come into a month. But increasingly more cities are waving the red flag, saying that this is a problem. In addition to the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, has said that his city can no longer afford to take in so many migrants. And I would just like to pause and state the obvious here, but nevertheless, it's extremely important. Think about geographically where Chicago and New York City are. They are not exactly bordering where the majority of these immigrants are coming from. So if these states, again, are waving the red flag, it really shows you the extent of this immigration crisis. According to the Department of Homeland Security, since President Biden took office in 2021, 5 million immigrants have crossed illegally into our country, and none of them, this is according to the DHS, have been tested for COVID-19. This is coming amid new legislation that President Biden and the Democrats in Congress have proposed, including amending some of the criteria for excluding immigrants to protect certain classes, including LGBTQ immigrants, allowing those immigrants who identify as LGBTQ to come into the United States immediately. Now, of course, this is just going to open the door for every immigrant to say that they identify as LGBTQ so that they can enter the country. Also, the end of Title 42 is going to come, or is expected to come, in the next few days unless the U.S. Supreme Court does something. Title 42 actually was a pandemic expulsion where the government reserved the right to keep certain migrants away in countries that were overly infected with COVID-19, though as we see from the Department of Homeland Security numbers, that was not really the case. So Title 42 wasn't exactly enforced and didn't work particularly well, but now that it is expected to be repealed in the next few days, it is only going to exacerbate the already very hard problem. In addition to 5 million people who have not been tested for COVID coming across our borders, there's also been a surge in drug overdoses in the United States, and specifically problems pertaining to fentanyl, which is pumped across our borders from drug cartels. Fentanyl, under President Biden's tenure in office, has become the #1 cause of death for those aged 18 to 45 in the United States. The Attorney General of Montana, which again is a northern state, said that it is the #1 problem facing the state of Montana. And on to our final news story of the day. This is both saddening and should give us all hope. There is a young man, a 12-year-old by the name of William Morrison. He is a Massachusetts middle schooler at John T. Nichols Jr. Middle School, who was sent home on March 21st of this year for wearing a shirt that said there are only two genders. He bravely went before the Middleborough School Council, specifically the school board, and talked about how ridiculous he thought it was that he was sent home for wearing such a shirt, and supported other students' right to have those beliefs. Let's listen to a segment of his speech to the school board.
In the 7th, 10th grade at Nichols Middle School, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I never thought that the shirt I wore to school on March 21st would lead me to speak with you today. On that Tuesday morning, I was taken out of gym class to sit down with two adults for what turned out to be a very uncomfortable talk. I was told that people were complaining about the words on my shirt, that my shirt was making some students feel unsafe. Yes, words on a shirt made people feel unsafe. They told me that I wasn't in trouble, but it sure felt like I was. I was told that I would need to remove my shirt before I could return to class. When I nicely told them that I didn't want to do that, they called my father. Thankfully, my dad supported my decisions and came to pick me up. What did my shirt say? 5 simple words. There are only two genders. Nothing harmful, nothing threatening, just a statement I believe to be a fact. I have been told that my shirt was targeting a protected class. Who is this protected class? Are their feelings more important than my rights? I don't complain when I see pride flags and diversity posters hung throughout the school. Do you know why? Because others have a right to their beliefs just as I do.
This boy has more clarity than most adults. It really is amazing to see his courage. And again, it should give us all hope. One of the things that is a bedrock of civilization is understanding distinctions between right and wrong, holy and profane, legal and illegal, and of course, as we see here, male and female. If you look at these past two news stories, actually all three news stories today, with people lying about COVID, that is an elimination of the distinctions between lie and truth, right and wrong. That is being unraveled. Here, when Democrat politicians are talking about the immigration crisis, that is an unraveling of the distinctions that we once had of legal and illegal. This new the policy that's being proposed to allow any immigrants that identify as LGBTQ to be let into the country violates this distinction between legal and illegal. And here we see this unraveling of distinctions of male and female. The fact that this boy was sent home for just wearing a shirt that affirmed a basic bedrock distinction really says a lot about the health or lack of health of our society. But again, it's a very good thing that increasingly more people like Mr. Liam are speaking up. Maybe I should invite him onto the show to chit chat. You guys can get in touch with him. And you all can get in touch with me by emailing at julie@julie-hartman.com and following me at Julie R. Hartman on Instagram and Twitter. Take care, everyone. See you soon.